Welcome to Payment Matters, the show where we discuss all things healthcare payments. I'm your host, Jeff Lin. And thank you to all the listeners that are listening today on our very first episode. If you want to follow us more and learn more about this, please follow the show on Twitter at #PaymentMatters and follow me at Jeff B. Lin. So I want to take a moment as we take a step back and really explain what this podcast and what this series is all about. I'm really excited to have an opportunity to share and talk about the healthcare payments industry and how there are real issues that are happening in healthcare payments today, and really talk about the wide range of topics of healthcare payments and how it may impact consumers, also looking at the security risks tied to that, and also look at the political debates that really kind of influence and impact all things related to healthcare payments. We also want to bring forward the concepts of looking at healthcare providers, payers, consumers, and even healthcare IT vendors to see their perspectives and viewpoints on healthcare payments. I'll be bringing on guests weekly who are leaders and innovators in the space, and really want to bring their unique perspective to approaching the challenges and, with that being said, the opportunities for healthcare payments. So before we dive in, I want to just take a brief moment to introduce myself. I have had over 20 years of experience in healthcare payments. Spent my entire career focused on the segment and really thinking of unique ways to drive change and be innovative in this space. My current role is the Senior VP of Product Management at InstaMed, really healthcare's most trusted payments network. My day-to-day job involves overseeing the ongoing product innovation of InstaMed's healthcare payment solutions for providers, payers, consumers, and healthcare IT vendors. Before InstaMed, I was an executive at Accenture, focused on large-scale enterprise analytics, CRM implementations for Fortune 100 companies. And prior to that, my undergrad education was at UCLA, graduated with a degree in microbiology and molecular genetics. And really have had a great family here. I have two really young kids, aged 1 and 3. So I've really been, experiencing firsthand really the opportunities and challenges of healthcare payments. And also really enjoy I live in Southern California, really enjoy the sunshine today. It's a blue sky, 80 degrees today in the middle of January. So really excited to talk to you about that. And also prior in my life, I also was a former Eagle Scout. So, with that being said, why does healthcare payments matter? Why do payments matter? And at the end of the day, the payments matters because at the end of the day, it's really the exchange of value. Someone paying for something, paying for a service, and really paying for their medical service. And really, this is a unique thing in the industry as you look at this. No one in the industry is like healthcare payments. You look at this across the board. It's estimated that the consumer out-of-pocket spend this year is about $400 billion and could be growing to $600 billion in a few years. That's a significant chunk of our consumer wallet. And really when you look at the overall healthcare payments economy, which it comprises about 18 to 20% of the overall GDP, this is a really big part of our lives. So part of this is how do we go about addressing this? How do we go about fixing this? And the nature of healthcare is all about connecting all the various parties together to make sure we reduce the friction out of healthcare payments. Great. So, one of the interesting things about payments and healthcare payments is really the differences and the gaps we see between healthcare and other industries. So I'll highlight one use case here. One is the hotel check-in, check-out model. So think about when you check into a hotel, you walk up to the desk, they immediately up front, they welcome you saying, Jeff, welcome to the hotel. and they ask for your ID to confirm who you are. And number two, they ask for a payment method so they can secure payment on file. And they tell you, great, you'll be staying here for X days. You have this type of room, and your cost is going to be, Y dollars here. And they really kind of do this in such a streamlined way. So you kind of expect it. The ID is going to be there. The card has to be presented. And it really provides the seamless check-in experience. Now let's compare that with the healthcare environment. When you check in, oftentimes they'll ask for your ID and your insurance card just to make sure they can take a photocopy of it. And they have you fill out a whole bunch of forms up front here. But never once do they say how much is your cost going to be, or what your estimated cost going to be, or an understanding of what the expectations will be from a payment perspective. And so really just then and there, you can see here that upfront in the check-in process, there is a gap. Now let's take this the next step. Let's talk about the checkout process. When you're in the hotel, they set expectations up front with you. When you go to the desk and say, I want to check out of my room, they go, great. And they provide you a written receipt or even an email now, see that more often, about the actual charges for the stay. And it's detailed out, itemized for you. So you have a full confidence about how much was charged to your credit card. Now let's compare that with healthcare. When you check out after your services have been rendered by your healthcare provider, you walk out and you're out the door. And at most, they'll try to schedule a next appointment with you, but they're not collecting anything. They're not setting expectations. And what happens here is then you get surprised by a bill, and I'll use the word surprise, and 30 to 45 days later on, a bill comes in the mail saying, great, Jeff, you have a bill and you have to pay this now. So really really look at that. That's a big gap and a difference between healthcare and just the industry of, we're looking at the hospitality industry, who has been refining the consumer experience in terms of the check-in, check-out experience. So I want to really highlight this, and then we take this healthcare experience and you multiply that, and its fact is it's 20% of the economy. There are real problems from a consumer perspective and a consumer experience perspective that we can really, really improve on. Great. So with that being said, I want to just introduce today's guest, who is Deirdre Ruttle. She's been with InstaMed for 6, maybe 7 years here, and she's currently the VP of Strategy at InstaMed. So really excited to have her on today as the first guest. And before we begin, Deirdre, why don't you do a brief introduction about your background and how you came to this panel?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. So happy to be here today. So I've been in the healthcare payments world for about 7 years, and really focused on the technology behind how we're moving healthcare data and moving money, especially focused in the payer space for several years, working with large health plans across the country, and as they address some of their healthcare payment needs, both in the B2B space as well as in the C2B space. And then I also have spent a lot of time digging into the data. As you're familiar with, InstaMed does an annual Trends in Healthcare Payments report, and that report is compiled from survey data from consumers, providers, and payers, as well as data from the InstaMed platform, and then of course third-party data sources, leaders like Accenture, Deloitte, CMS, et cetera, who are looking at what's going on in the healthcare payments world. So I spend a lot of time, looking at those trends and, seeing how technology, how business process, how, anything can help improve the healthcare payments experience for all parties, consumers, providers, and payers. And then before, getting into the healthcare payments world, I was completely outside of healthcare, really focused in the C2B as well as B2B e-commerce worlds, in a variety of industries, but ultimately, bring a lot of that experience and a lot of those retail consumer best practices into the lens of how I look at healthcare and ultimately how InstaMed looks at healthcare payments.
Great, Deirdre. And, it's interesting, as you say, the intersection between healthcare and your experiences there, and the fact that your prior experience was really focused on, you said retail, and the intersection there is kind of a unique background. And once again, really excited to have you join us today. So really the first question that comes to mind is, what are the main challenges in healthcare payments industry that you've seen that we faced in the most recent years, and what's going on, and where do you see that headed?
Sure. So I think that the rapid increase in consumer responsibility has many impacts. Certainly you can point to the impact that it has on consumers' household budgets and the amount of money that they're spending. And I think that when we look at what's happening with the increase in spend, it's across the board. And when you dig into the data, there's, the headline and the talking point used to be, this is about high deductible health plans. High deductible health plans certainly play a role here, but when you look at the data that shows when you look at the data that shows deductibles and their growth, it's not limited to high deductible health plans. It's across the board for all plan types. Additionally, when you look at premiums and the cost of premiums, we see increases across the board there. So this rapid increase is making consumers look at healthcare differently, right? Because when you're asked to spend more money on something, your expectations shift. And for a long time, it's been okay to say that healthcare was 20 years behind. That's not okay anymore. And you're seeing that in the shifts in consumer survey data and consumer research that's coming out across the board from many organizations that are focused on this. And then it changes relationships, right? When you look at the relationships that we have in a three-party system, that increase in consumer responsibility, providers need to collect more from patients. So there's, shifts that are happening in provider organizations and, expectations that providers need to meet. Consumers need to make more payments. And so consumers are looking at that in a variety of ways and asking, or even demanding, being able to make those payments in ways that are convenient to them. Payers need to collect directly from consumers for individual insurance and collect those premiums. Payers historically did very little in that area, did very little in the one-to-one relationship. So you see all these dynamics playing out, and you see some real shifts. And what do I think is ahead? I think that intersection of healthcare and retail is becoming very real. And I think that as you look at major healthcare organizations, both on the payer side and the provider side, you're seeing new job titles pop up that have the word experience in it, that, the consumer, the patient experience, the member experience, and you're seeing, consumer retail leaders from high profile organizations be pulled into healthcare. And I'm sure you've read some recent headlines about a major player who's, dabbling more and more in healthcare. So again, when you ask people to spend more money, they expect more.
Yeah, great. And this is quite interesting. As you were talking, I kind of look at this healthcare payment ecosystem as a major shift, a major change, and I call this the inflection point, but an inflection point in healthcare timelines. But these are significant dollars that we're seeing that has major impacts across what you said about the retailification and the consumer. And really, at the end of the day, it's a major shift in the entire relationship in terms of how care is delivered. And with that being said, payment becomes a key part of that. Now, with that being said, how from your point of view as a person that's been in other industries and has seen that consumerism take shape here, how would you compare healthcare payments to payments in other industries?
Yes, I think that if we want to face brutal facts and be real with one another, healthcare's got a long way to catch up. And I think that, the payment experience within healthcare has been deprioritized for too long. And some of it was because it wasn't as necessary, it wasn't as much of a need. Historically, when providers were collecting the majority of the revenue through payers, they could write off patient bad debt and not have it have a significant impact on their organization. When payers were really engaged with consumers through employer groups exclusively, they didn't have those individual relationships and that dynamic at play. And so now, fast forward, you have this rapidly shifting healthcare payments ecosystem, and we need to catch up. And we need to look at the other payment experiences that consumers have, and we really need to look at those as that's what consumers expect. It's not, okay, let's compare healthcare 10 years ago to healthcare now. No, we need to look at it in terms of, I can walk out of this interview and on my way from the office to the elevator, I can order my groceries, I can order a prescription refill, I can get a ride back to my next location, and I can check in on my household without ever talking to anyone, all from the convenience of my phone, all within while I'm multitasking doing something else. And those expectations get put on, all right, when I do have a healthcare encounter, I want to understand what's going on. I want to understand what's going on with the billing process. And I don't want to put up with the mysteries of healthcare anymore. So we have a lot of catching up to do.
That's great. I touch upon a couple of words that you just said, which is convenience. And in the prior response, you talked about relationships. And all these things, really kind of all fall under the umbrella of the retail experience. and you also mentioned that earlier. And as we dig into this, I think the theory that you're postulating here is that the role of the consumer is changing in healthcare payments. And really interested in, from your perspective, what do consumers want? Really, how have they influenced change from your perspective?
Sure. So through my work with the annual Trends in Healthcare Payments report, I have spent a lot of time looking at the data and looking at those consumer preferences and how they bring those retail experiences to healthcare. And it's interesting when you dig in that 3 out of 4 consumers have consistently said that they want to pay all of their healthcare bills in one place. And that idea or that notion that there is a centralized place for paying healthcare bills is something new. But when you ask consumers, the majority of them absolutely want it. The interesting thing is that once you dig further into that, there isn't one place that is the silver bullet that they all want to make those payments. And so, for instance, from a strategy point of view, there isn't one thing to go build and all the consumers will come to it, right? This isn't there isn't a field of dreams for healthcare payments. But what the data shows is that this is a need that is across the board with consumers, regardless of generation, regardless of oftentimes socioeconomic status. So what you need to do is build an experience, right, as an organization where you do allow consumers, whether you think of them as patients, you think about them as members, to be able to make all their payments in one place, but it's got to be convenient for them, right? And I use the word convenience all the time because I truly believe we live in the convenience economy, and it keeps getting more convenient, right? And so whether that is a consumer who wants to log into their health plans portal and pay all their healthcare bills through that experience, or it could be a consumer that wants to make all their payments through a patient portal, through a provider or a healthcare system that they're using for all of their healthcare needs. Or maybe they want to use their bank bill payments website to make all those payments. Consumers absolutely have different preferences when you look at the payment channels. So, there's a lot of layers here, and that convenience plays out in a lot of different ways. Just like if we went onto the street right now and asked 10 people, how do you pay your utility bills? They're likely paying their utility bills, but they're paying them in different ways, right? And so we need to think about healthcare payments the same way.
Got it. The one thing as I reflect upon this discussion is we really haven't talked about the government and their role here. As you look at the healthcare economy here, U.S. healthcare spending is still about 20% of the GDP, if not more. And how do you see this with Obamacare, Trump Care, whatever acronym or name you want to call it? How do you see what's the role of government in terms of healthcare payments?
Sure, that's a great question, and I think that healthcare and the act that is currently being discussed is making headlines on a daily basis. At the end of the day, though, when I look at it, I take a step back and say, regardless of the party that's in control and regardless of the name of the act that is in place, consumers are going to take on more of the burden for overall healthcare costs. And I think that there are certainly valiant efforts to try to cut costs and make healthcare spending more efficient and cut the waste, but ultimately no party, no act is going to be able to create the funding that is needed to pay for how expensive healthcare is. And so when I think about it from a healthcare payments perspective, I certainly am watching the political climate and understanding what's going on there, but ultimately there still has to be that focus on the consumer, that focus on the consumer experience. Certainly within this the realm of this discussion, something we're not touching on is how can healthcare be more affordable, right? And unfortunately, the best technology and the best payment experience is not going to be able to meet those needs. But when you look at the portion of the population that can afford to pay their bills, and oftentimes they're not paying their bills because they don't understand what they need to pay or how to pay it. If we can help that problem and help providers, deliver that better experience, help payers deliver that better experience that ultimately benefits the consumer, then I think that that's where we need to focus. Additionally, when you look at how politics plays out, we try to take a common sense approach, and when you look at healthcare and how much paper there still is and how many manual transactions are still happening every day, I think that regardless of your political affiliation, you can agree that the $9.4 billion estimate, which personally I believe is very low, let's put $9.4 billion back into healthcare and back into getting people better, keeping people healthy, as opposed to the waste that happens today.
That's great. As I think about this and all the politics that surround healthcare, one of the things, as I was reading recently, is about MACRA. And MACRA was a legislation passed in 2015, really that focuses on called the Medicare and Medicaid spending here. And one of the key things here is it was all about managing costs. And there was strong bipartisan support. In the Senate voted for it 92-8. The House voted 392-37. So one of the key things as we look at this is, there's the government spending is going to stay flat, if not increase a little bit, but there is strong support from both parties and both parties in the aisle to really kind of focus on kind of capping that spending. And therein lies the opportunity as you look at the commercials like United Healthcare, Aetna, and all the major health plans out there where they're focusing on consumers and so on. I think this is an amazing opportunity for a lot of these entities out there, the entire healthcare ecosystem, to really capture the mind share of consumers and really engage with them in a unique light.
So those are the payment matters we're focusing on today. Please join us next time. We really want to share more insights and also uncover more opportunities in healthcare payments. In the meantime, thank you to all the listeners who are listening in on this podcast. We really value your feedback and really want to hear about topics that interest you. Please share your ideas with me on Twitter at Jeff Lin. I look forward to tackling more payment matters with you next month.